Hello, and welcome to Guys Dealings with Feelings, the podcast dedicated to addressing men's mental health issues and providing practical solutions. My journey has been profoundly shaped by the tragic loss of my son. I'm here to share what I've learned and continue to discover along the way. If you enjoy and find this podcast helpful, please like, share, subscribe, and follow us wherever you're listening. Following us in your 5-star review can make a significant difference in spreading our message and potentially changing someone's life. You can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcast under Guys Dealings with Feelings, and on YouTube and Instagram at ITU Thrive. That's the letter I, the number 2, the letter U, and the word thrive. I'm so happy and grateful to have Dean Graves on with me today. Dean is an author, podcaster, mental health counselor, and consciousness researcher. He's a renowned meditation teacher, mental health counselor, and spiritual guide with over 20 years of experience in the field. Through his expertise in mental health and deep spiritual understanding, he provides a holistic approach to healing and growth. I'm sure looking forward to digging into some interesting topics with Dean. And Dean, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here, Aaron.
Yeah, it's awesome. There's some things I'm looking forward to discussing with you. But before we get going, if you could kind of just give us all a brief how you landed here on your journey.
I'll make it as brief as I can.
Take your time. Yeah.
I lived a normal life up until about the age of 50, and I had an awakening when I was about 50. And an awakening is a greatly misunderstood phrase. An awakening is nothing more than that point in our life when we realize that all the stuff that we've been doing is not making us happier. That is an awakening in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
It can happen when you're 20, it can happen when you're 30, it can happen when you're 50, it can happen at any time that you're ready for that awakening. And once we have that awakening, then we are tasked with exploring what other alternatives are out there. And my journey led me to meditation. I began meditating daily at about 50. And through that meditation practice, I had some remarkable awarenesses, and that has propelled me to where I am today.
Yeah, right on. And your awakening, I don't attach that term necessarily to what occurred to me. Mine occurred after my son had passed away. I used it. I use that gut wrenching trauma to state that's where my foundation was laid. I was broken down to the bare me.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have been more raw a human being at that moment. Suicide was a very real thought, and I couldn't have been more raw a human being at that moment. Suicide was a very real thought. And, once I made my mind up because of my other children that I wasn't going to explore the option of suicide, I was I literally laid bare. I didn't know what to do or where to go. So when you say that you had an awakening at 50, I pop up to think, oh, okay, well, what, and I'm not asking if it was a traumatic event. A traumatic event is an official response to this question. I'm very careful not to dig into train wrecks here. This is not a place to look at train wrecks. It's a place to see how they get cleaned up. So if it was a traumatic event, that's fine. But if it was something just life, midlife crisis, anything like that, I'm interested to hear what spawned or spurred or whatever the appropriate word is there, your awakening.
I did not have a traumatic event. It was, I guess I did. I was going through a divorce at the time.
That's traumatic for sure.
That was a significant trigger, but it was a culmination of things. In retrospect, we see with 2020, or hopefully we do. But usually, what happens, and I work with a lot of veterans that are mostly men in my mental health practice, and they have lots of traumas and lots of things that have occurred in their life that they haven't resolved yet. And so the trigger can be a single event, as it was in your life, or it can be a series of events that accumulate over a period of time. But what is happening is our perception of self, our identity, is significantly challenged. who we think we are is no longer able to be supported by what our experiences are providing us. And as humans, and this is true of all humans, we are obligated to create a hierophant. And we do this from the moment that we're born. As soon as we start processing thoughts, then we are beginning to form a hierophant, which is nothing more than a false perception of self. But this hierophant is who we think we are.
Can you spell that for us? I'm
No,
not just close.
yeah.
I can't tell if you're saying hierophant or caro, just close.
Hierophant. You can call it an identity. All exactly the same thing. There's no
Yeah.
distinction between what that actually is.
Okay. I'm sure that I could not spell it either. I wasn't trying to put you on
But
the
it's
spot. I was
H
just
I
trying for
E
the.
R O P H A N T.
Okay, that should be close enough that a Google will fix it if it's not, so folks
Yeah.
can go out and look at this. Okay, great. Okay.
And this hierophant requires us to create an ego mind. And a mind is an often misunderstood part of our experience. Psychology studies behavior, uh, and they call that a mind, but that's not a mind. That's the result of the mind. A mind is nothing more than a bundle of beliefs, and it is the filter that we use in order to interpret our experiences. And because it's a hierophant, it's a false perception of self. And we add to it every time that we have an experience, we modify this hierophant because the hierophant's sole purpose is to get more of what we like. And of course, as when we're an infant, we don't know what we like. That's part of the process of discovering what it is that we like. And what we like continues to migrate as we gain maturity. We form this ego mind, accepting a lot of beliefs that are simply provided to us by osmosis, by our parents, our siblings, our friends, society in general. Every belief that we have accepted, either knowingly or unknowingly, comprises this mind. And when we reach a point of awareness, then we begin to realize that is our beliefs that are causing us stress. Every time we experience something that we don't like, and it is purely our decision whether we like it or don't like it, that in and of itself is stress. Some are more significant, some of it is minor, but that notwithstanding, every time that we have an experience that doesn't get more of what we like, the design is that we're supposed to become aware of what belief that we've incorporated into our hierophant, into our false identity, that needs to be examined and surrendered. We have events in life that are almost invariably providing us with opportunities to get more of what we don't like, but nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to go out and get more of what I don't like. Mm-hmm. Ideally, we're going to go out and try to get more of what we like, regardless of what that is. Maturity of our consciousness can be measured essentially in three phases, and these, for most people, follows along the maturation process. The initially, as a child, things that provide us with immediate gratification are our mainstay, and so we look for candy, we look for friends to play with, things of that nature. For some people, that doesn't change. The nature of the gratification changes as an adult, but it is all geared towards giving us more of what we like. What we like is very transient, and it's in staying in that phase of our development is very Sisyphusian. In other words, we're pushing the rock up the hill every day, and every night it's going to roll back down, and we have to do it all over again. Mm-hmm. And so people that are consciously immature are functioning with the need for immediate gratification. As we mature, then we move into the social aspect, which is the middle of the Hierophant design. And in that are all of these social beliefs. All religion is in the social beliefs, how we're supposed to behave, if you dress a certain way, if you treat other people a certain way, then we expect to be rewarded with more of what we like, mostly more long term gratification. But this is a very difficult period, and it is a range that when we begin, then we vacillate between the immediate gratification and the social stage. As we mature, we move deeper into the social stage, and we begin to develop morality, ethics, things that people identify as um, associated with wisdom and quality of character. And these things are not things that can be taught. It's things that you do naturally based upon your consideration of other people. If we continue to mature, which is rare in our earthly experience, we move into the basic phase. And the basic phase is dealing with those beliefs that we have incorporated. For example, you and I probably perceived ourselves as white males. We perceive ourselves to be human. We perceive ourselves to have a certain characteristics that go with that. But that too is erroneous from the standpoint that that is not us. That is simply the nature of our experience in this particular lifetime. And as we continue to go, then we begin to surrender that. We're not going to change the body that we have, but we recognize that it is a transient filter that we're using in order to continue to interpret our experiences. The goal in this range of consciousness that we all share is to get to that point where we have less of this hierophant. We're not going to get rid of it entirely in this range of consciousness, but we can surrender it enough to know that we are who we truly are. As we surrender these beliefs that we've incorporated into this false identity, then more of our authentic self emerges. And as the Buddha taught, as many well known spiritual teachers taught, our authentic self is always there. And it is what we seek. In other words, it provides us with that constant perception of self that allows us to experience significantly greater happiness. The concept of stress is our teacher. Every time that we experience stress, that is a message to us about what we need to learn in order to heal and advance along the enlightenment path. And the enlightenment path is synonymous with the evolution of consciousness. There's no difference, just different names for the same thing. Mm-hmm. Most people perceive enlightenment to be a destination because of the successes of the Buddha. But the enlightenment path is a progression along this that we are working on in order to surrender this perception of self, this false perception of self. And there is no identity that is true. Every identity, regardless of how ideal you perceive it to be, is false. And we learn that as we give it up, and then we learn by analogy. We learn by comparison and contrast. We have one experience, and I use the example of you've decided that chocolate ice cream is your favorite flavor. And when you go into the ice cream store, you're going to stand in front of that ice cream bowl or whatever it is that they scoop out of. And you're going to say, I want chocolate ice cream. And I know that because that's my favorite. But in order to determine that, you had to taste the other 149 other flavors that are there in order to eliminate them. So having these experiences of stress are doing nothing more than giving us the opportunity to refine what it is that we truly like. Invariably, because we are all human, what we like is love. but we don't know what love is. And
Mm-hmm.
so, along this process, we're learning what we don't like, eliminating those, and allowing the love that we already are to emerge. And that love is stress free. Bliss is the absence of stress. And so, what happens when we begin to surrender these beliefs that are perpetuating our experience of stress, that leaves a void, and that void is immediately and automatically filled with greater happiness. And so, happiness is not something that we have to get, happiness is something that we have to allow ourselves to experience by changing ourself, which is the only thing that we can change anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and surrendering these false perceptions of self that we have incorporated into our false identity.
Yeah, that was a lot, and I want to make sure I tracked it 100%. But just to make sure that listening, we can do that. I want to talk about consciousness and the Hierophant versus the, I can't remember the word, the real us, authentic
The
self.
authentic self.
So, what is the process of one deconstructing the Hierophant into the authentic self? And I would assume we're going to see some crossover because our Hierophant isn't totally void of information. It was built during our experiences once we gained life, right? So, that to authentic self, there's some of that's got to cross paths, I would think. And is the answer to my question going to, if it is consciousness, then can you define consciousness and why how that melds together to be so important?
Well, it's the process of consciousness,
Okay.
of evolution of consciousness. It's not consciousness itself. We are consciousness. Everything that we experience is consciousness. That the wall behind you, the microphone in front of you is consciousness. It is at a different range of consciousness than what we perceive ourselves to be. Consciousness defined is our creatorness intoxicated with free will, which requires some unpacking.
Yeah.
Free will is a misunderstood concept, also. Philosophers for centuries have debated whether we have free will, whether life is predetermined, so on and so forth. We do have the choice to turn right or to turn left, but we have that choice because we perceive ourselves as being separate from the Creator. If we did not perceive ourselves as separate from the Creator, we would not have that choice of turning right or turning left. The free will, being the perception of separation, functions as an intoxicant. And creation is structured into layers of consciousness. We are at a very low level. We're very low range. We're in a range that is identified as third density. And we are the first range of consciousness that is able to assume responsibility for its progression through the consciousness process. And there are 5 layers above us, all of which are significantly less intoxicated with free will. Intoxication of free will acts very much like whiskey. The
Hmm.
more whiskey we get, the less awareness we have of who we are when we do stupid things,
Mm-hmm. I can
because we're
attest to this.
intoxicated with whiskey. Being intoxicated with free will allows us to explore our experiences without limit. And so, relatively speaking, we do stupid things because we don't know any better. But therein is the value of the process of comparison and contrast. We're narrowing down in our motivation, and our measure of how we're doing is whether we're getting happier or not.
Okay. So happiness is a benchmark for success along the enlightenment path.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, that is outstanding. I love that. And I agree with it 100%. I just love how you put it together. And okay, so I agree also with the enlightenment path as kind of like a spectrum, with the beginning being we've opened our eyes to the fact that we've had our eyes closed,
Mm-hmm.
and all the way up to somebody like a Buddha, maybe some other religious figures, not necessarily to be named now. Those have gained enlightenment to a point of they're not a deity, but they're close to the creator,
Well,
right?
to
With
us,
their
they would perceive to be, we would perceive them to be a deity, but they're not. They still have a long way to go
right, but
on their own.
they jumped into these other. You say we were in the third, and there was five more above us. Is that on that spectrum, that enlightenment spectrum,
Yeah,
or is that then again another jump outside?
no, it's all the same
Okay.
spectrum.
So those
It's
people that I'm talking about, again, we'll just think Buddha, but you could throw a Jesus or somebody like that in there as well. These enlightened individuals gain access to these next dimensions because of their growth, right?
yes,
And we are capable of reaching it. We just don't, because we don't stop and just dive inside ourselves, right? That there's
we
it's
will reach it. It's inevitable that we will. It's just a
oh,
matter of when.
okay. Can we
So
go a little further on that?
if we're willing to do the work, we'll get there faster.
Okay.
But if we remain unconscious
Mhm.
and keep reinforcing this hierophant, then it'll take us longer.
Okay, well, I'd like to know more. How do we? That sounds like death. So at death is when we would reach the next. If we don't work on it and we don't pay attention and we don't do the inward dive and all that, when you say we're going to meet it, what happens?
Well, we simultaneously exist in both the metaphysical world and the physical world. Our enduring self is our metaphysical self, which is a consciousness pattern. We don't have a body like we do now, but we are a body by virtue of our consciousness pattern. What you and I are experiencing right now is an analog projection of our metaphysical self. And we have a body, and we have incarnated multiple times. The average human has incarnated over 3,000 times, and some as many as 8,000 times. We've been male, we've been female, we've been black, we've been white, we've been yellow, we've been red, we've been all of those. We've been rich, we've been poor. And each of these bodies and environments provide us with the opportunity to create this hierophantic lens in order to interpret our experiences. What is preserved from lifetime after we die, what is preserved and incorporated into our consciousness pattern, our enduring self, is what we have learned about the five inherent characteristics of the Creator, which very simply are awareness, love, wisdom, unity, and stillness. The range of consciousness that we currently experience, we are tasked with awakening, with becoming aware, and eventually, in order to qualify for graduation to fourth grade, the fourth range of consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
is to become awareness. And these are hierarchical only from the standpoint that you have to build the floor before you build the walls, you have to build the walls before you build the roof, and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. There's no hierarchy inherent to the inherent characteristics other than the necessity of learning the lessons of third grade before you go to fourth grade,
Understood.
because you won't be able to do fourth grade work unless you learn the lessons of third grade.
Right. So walk before you got to learn to walk before you can learn to run.
Yeah.
And so that's simple. And then what's the philosophy that your that you back this with? I don't know any other way to ask this question. So you're talking about being incarnated up to 8,000, some 8,000 times. Where where does that come? Where does that information come from?
From my higher self, it's the structure of creation.
Okay. And can you go into the purpose of creation?
Yeah, purpose of creation is so that the one infinite creator can know itself by experiencing itself.
And then what is the creator, a god? Is there a god? How does that?
Well, God is a religious concept, and the foundation of every major religion that I'm familiar with is that there is a God and that there is you. And that in and of itself is erroneous. We are the one infinite creator experiencing ourselves at this range of consciousness. So the ultimate experiencer, the decider of your experiences, the ultimate experiencer is the one infinite creator. We perceive that we have an individualized spirit. What we have is the capacity to ultimately recognize only a small portion of the Creator as our spirit. The mind is our filter because that's all the beliefs that we've incorporated.
Mm-hmm.
The body is something that we're just given, with this particular lifetime. But the ultimate experiencer is our spirit. That is what that is what we strive in this range of consciousness to liberate and to um, listen to and accept the input from our spirit, as opposed to the mind that we've created, this hierophant that we've created. And when Grandma or Aunt Susie or whoever it is told you as a kid, when you're making a decision, make the decision from your heart, not from your head. Well, your heart is what she's alluding to. Is your heart is your spirit, your higher awareness that is we are designed to learn to surrender to and to cease resisting, cease defending and protecting this false perception of self. Um,
And there was a little bit of a cutout on, I don't know who's in it, if mine or yours, but when you were talking about the spirit and so we've got the infinite creator and then we have a spirit inside of us. What was the connection?
well, the spirit's not inside of us. The spirit is what we are. Okay, the creation began. The one infinite creator that is outside of creation made this decision to learn of itself, to know itself by experiencing itself.
Okay.
And so it projected a concept. It is infinite, which means it is everything. Most people think of God as being infinite.
Mm-hmm.
If you break that down, what is infinity? Infinity is everything. One is the numerical value of infinity. Two is finite. Three is finite. Any other number is finite. The only infinite number there can be is one. And that's called the law of one. Everything is one. The infinite creator projected an analog projection, just like I was explaining that we do with our from our metaphysical self to this lifetime. An analog projection of itself, which simply meant that it was a conceptual projection of the creator. The only difference being it was intoxicated with free will. So it perceived itself as separate. So the creator can't be distorted because it's everything that there is, but it projected an analog projection of itself with free will. So it perceived itself as separate from the creator, began to interact with the creator and thereby creating uniqueness of experience. Being an analog projection, it had the same ambitions as the creator and began to create creation. Creation is a layering of 8 layers of consciousness. The creator as the object is the original, the one enduring, one infinite creator. The creator as the analog projection is the creator as the subject, which established the first subject-object relationship. The creator as the subject began to create creation by replicating that experience. Created a layer of consciousness called seventh density. And seventh density is a fractal of 8 densities. Sixth density is a fractal of seventh density. Fifth density is a fractal of sixth density, and so on down the line. Each layer being more intoxicated with free will. So it perceived itself as more separate from the creator. In seventh density, a very unique thing happened. The inherent characteristics of the creator that I relayed to you just a few minutes ago became delineated. And so there became a conscious being that was awareness. It was also the other 4 inherent characteristics, but it perceived itself primarily as being awareness. There was an entity that perceived itself as being love, still including all 5, but it was predominantly love. One was predominantly wisdom, one was predominantly unity and one was predominantly stillness. And the concept of manyness was introduced. So this was expanded exponentially because it would just replicated the same, each having unique experiences. Sixth density, seventh density, and eighth density are creator being densities. The sixth density's primary responsibility is the creation of the lower densities, of which we are participant. Our higher selves, we all have a higher self. It is not unique to us. They have many, many uh, projections of us in the lower densities. And they are responsible for the day-to-day management, the development of stars and planets, and we who perceive ourselves as autonomous beings into the different layers of consciousness within that spectrum of development. It's an ongoing process, so it is constantly expanding. Um, each universe and there are multiple universe, an infinite number of universes, is created by mixing and matching the inherent characteristics with distortions. And there are a total of 32 archetypes of the creator, five of which are the inherent characteristics, one is free will, and 26 other distortions. Our particular universe is designed with nine of those archetypes. And so our universe has expanded in increments of 9 stars at a time. We are part of a 9 star system. People who have heard of or communicate with Arcturians or Pleiadians, which are very active in guiding our existence here on Earth. They're just simply sister 9 star systems that have been in the system longer than we have, that are offering their guidance to aid us in our evolution.
Wow. Okay. So to try to, I'm trying to think of, I'm thinking out loud, but that was a lot of complexity in there. And so, and I'm tracking, I'm just wanting to make sure that anybody who hears it is tracking. And so this is most likely where the idea that we are created in the image. I'm agnostic. I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
scholar of any religion. I don't know if there is or isn't a God. I don't spend my time there. But is that where we would get that idea that we're created in the image of the one infinite creator? Is because we are individually our own creators, but at a
Well,
lower
yeah,
frequency?
that's probably where it came from. We all know this information down deep. You just got to go there to
So
rediscover it.
so it's in there. It's in all of us. Innately, it's in all of us.
Yeah,
Is the concept.
they've talked for centuries. We have this inherent motivation to know our creator,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing the creator. The process of evolution is the creator sending itself as far away from itself by this free will intoxication as it can, and then that consciousness migrating through the evolutionary process to return to unity with the creator. As we surrender, our progression is the process of surrendering this perception of separation. So the more successful we are with that, and that essentially was the process that I was outlining to you with the three divisions of the Hierophant,
Mm-hmm.
is when we're looking for immediate gratification from physical experiences, that's pretty far from the creator. When we surrender the perceptions of autonomy of ourself, then we're moving into that basic section, and we begin to realize who we are and what our purpose and what we are here to do. Everyone's purpose is exactly the same. Everyone's purpose is to explore themselves. Their mission is to do whatever they like, profession wise and so forth. If you are a physician, if you're a lawyer, if you're a plumber, if you're carpenter, whatever, that is simply what you have chosen to do to provide you with the types of experiences that will allow you to have the awarenesses to explore yourself.
And then those build upon each other again. Walk before we run. The more
Sure.
we learn and get disconnected, so it's coming together. So less. So the more disconnected or the less connected we are to this idea of free will, the closer we are getting to back to that sixth, seven, eighth
Yeah.
dimensions where we talked about the higher ends of enlightenment.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
I'm
remember,
tracking.
we're way down on the totem pole. And so, it's difficult to have, we perceive ourselves to be an autonomous being in a single organism.
Right.
And as we progress through those layers, we surrender the autonomy of our individual organism and begin to merge with others to form larger organisms. And eventually, we reunify with the one organism.
And this would lend itself as well to the, and I don't even know what community we would give credit to this for, but the scientific community. Tesla was big on it, in that there's a layer of information that we're all have available to us. The ability to tap into the information is, I believe, the stages of enlightenment is how I'm putting it together. Are you tracking what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
There,
Yeah.
there's a knowledge. And it may be that it's inside of, in your philosophy, that it's in, all of that is inside of us, all of us. We just must figure out through the work and the process of how to identify it, and then we become, now we're tapped into it, and then since we're tapped into ours, we're tapped into all. Is that,
Yeah,
am I
we
right?
perceive, as part of our low level of consciousness, we perceive that we create thoughts. We don't create thoughts. We attract thoughts according to how we are. Every thought that we could possibly think is there for our use, for our attraction. Someone who is deemed to be a genius, as opposed to somebody that's just really smart, has adequately surrendered that autonomous perception of self. Einstein and Nikola Tesla being two prime examples. They simply surrendered that perception of autonomy of self and tapped into the range of thoughts that allowed them to appear to be genius. Of course, they had the foundation to understand what it was that they were tapping into.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true of any specialty that we have geniuses in that classification. All that distinguishes them from somebody that's really smart and studied the material is they've opened themselves to that possibility, to those thoughts. Creation is a thought experiment. It's a huge thought experiment, and there's nothing that we can experience that does not come to us in thought. The Buddha told us this. If you want a more philosophical approach, Immanuel Kant, the father of modern philosophy, came up with the same conclusion that we can't experience anything that doesn't come to us in thought. And so the thoughts is what is creation. In our processing of thoughts, our capability to process those thoughts allows us to advance along the enlightenment path. That's why it's called enlightenment. Light is information, and light tells energy how to be. We are energy. And so the shapes and forms and all the things that we perceive to be the world around us are nothing more than how information has told energy to be. And we direct that because we are the creator. We direct that by virtue of how we process our thoughts. So if we want to change some aspect of our experience, invariably the thing we need to change is us and surrender these false perceptions of self to allow ourselves to, we perceive it to be creating, but all we're doing is creating the nature of the experience that we find more pleasurable.
Which it creates. So it does do that.
Which it appears,
Yeah, and so
yeah.
it appears. And that is what gives us so much of what appears to be autonomy, is that we think we've made a decision to do something, and then boom, it appears. And so we made that happen. But really, we just opened our eyes
We just allowed it to happen.
Yeah, when I say open our eyes, I don't mean physically. And yes, we opened ourselves to allow it to be there. And I deal with a lot of this, but I deal with it at such a rudimentary level. It lacks this type of, I don't want to say, I guess, philosophical depth, in that I understand that through the reticular activating system and our beliefs combined, there ain't but so much getting from what all we absorb as this thing, body,
Hmm.
to get to where we actually see, think, whatever. Only a part of it gets through, and that is directly affected by our perspective, how we're looking at things, and so it falls right into everything you're saying. The way you say it is just, it sounds a lot better. I think I say the way I say it sounds like a
I'm just more
fool.
practiced in
Yeah, well, I
explaining
guess I
it.
felt like a fool tripping through something that I've lived through. And what I am is just an example of this. I'm a living example of what you're defining and what others define, what I've learned and all that. I'm just a living example of that. And I don't know what state I still feel pretty unenlightened, but I know I'm more enlightened than I used to be. And it all falls in line with exactly everything you're saying. I just had to get it down to layman, I guess, terms to where I could get it. But it totally falls in place. So the more that we learn about ourselves, the more open to all of the possibilities we become, and therefore all the possibilities can now be present in front. They were present the whole time, but because we had our figurative eyes closed to them, we couldn't see them because
Right.
our perspective was negative, and because we have these thoughts that our lives will just continue to be this way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is a preventative close eye approach. Whereas if we approach it with, everything that is happening around me, I can control how I perceive it. I can control how I feel when it happens. You can't control it necessarily. We control ourselves, and that's all. But we can control how we perceive it, and then in turn, we can control what we do and don't actually experience.
Yes.
So okay, awesome. I brought it all together.
Thank you.
There for a bit, I was like, oh no, can I pull this together? So yeah, I pulled it together, and so all of that is awesome. Agree with it 100% now that I've wrapped my mind all the way around it. And happiness is what I am after. I think it's you said it's our goal is the and the happier
Well,
we are, the more
it's the measure of how we're doing.
it's a transcending through this enlightenment phase. So could you give us some tools for somebody who is at the closest, they feel they have the most free will, I guess is the best way to say it. So they're the most intoxicated with free will. How does this individual save the traumatic experience? And when I had the traumatic experience, it wasn't like I had the traumatic experience and then the next day I woke up and I felt more enlightened. This has been 12 years been going on. My son's angel day was August 7th. It's been 12 years since his passing, and I'm now to these places, but the last 5 years have been opening my mind and the physiology that goes with all that and all that. And then the 7 years before that was spent on all shoulders up. I didn't do any of the physiologic work, which I think is what brings it all together.
Hmm.
It's without the physiology piece, it's just the sugar expecting for a cake to get baked, and we got to have all the ingredients, or it ain't gonna be a cake. It's just gonna be an ingredient. And so I was
Right.
just an ingredient, and then several ingredients, and now I've been able to piece a lot of this together, learning more. Like I said at the beginning of every podcast, I'm learning more daily. But what, and even if it is a traumatic event, so it's something jarring, and I definitely consider a divorce a traumatic event. I've been through a couple of them, and they are traumatic, and they're not as glaringly traumatic as a son dying, obviously, but that is so much, I think, what we deal with in, at least in America, in our society. I can't speak for the other societies, but from where I've grown up, is that we are all traumatized just in the classic definition that our nervous systems couldn't handle the circumstances presented to us. Therefore, they dropped us into the amygdala where we're stuck in fight or flight. That's all I mean by that. So at some point in our life, almost all of us has experienced something so heavy that our nervous system couldn't handle it. And we need to go through this. So if somebody's in that place or stuck or things like that. What are some tools that can just get somebody, I'm going to use the word crack, but I don't mean physically, but to crack into this, to crack the code. I know for me, there was a couple of experiences where real light bulbs came off, but is it something you found? Is there a tool you found that can help open one up to that? Because we're so, I don't know if we're in love with the Hierophant, or we're just so clouded by our free will. I don't know what it is that has us all messed up. I was blind as a damn bat as far as all this shit we're talking about. Sorry, all the stuff we're talking about right now, I was blind as a bat, and now I see. But there was so much between that. Is there some things that can kick that off for somebody, or what have you
Yeah,
found?
it's a process, and I'm going to answer your question about tools, but to give a little bit of a preview, this hierophant, this false identity that we create, we want it to work. And in order to make it work, we have to create what I call peer supports. And I don't mean PEER, I mean PIER.
Okay,
Just like the peer, the supports hold a peer or a dock up,
a foundation, if
we
you will.
we have friends that resonate with our identity. In other words, they're our friends because we feel comfortable with them and they feel comfortable with us, and we experience less stress when we're in their presence. That's a peer support to hold our identity in place. Certain family members are another peer support. We may have lots of family members, but we don't associate with them all. We only associate with a few. Those few that we associate with are also a peer support for our false identity. It's one reason why people are so oftentimes so easily triggered by their mother, because their mother knows that hierophant is not them, and so she pokes that authentic self to get it to emerge. And we take offense at that because no, I'm a super dude that I've developed over these years. And so
Mm-hmm.
as we become adults, mothers more than fathers usually are a source of irritation to us because they're not recognizing our false identity. We join groups that also become peer supports for our identity because we feel comfortable with the group feels comfortable with us, and we have that natural resonance. We don't make it a checklist of I'm joining this group because they're this day, that way, or whatever. We just feel comfortable with them. We choose our spouses the same way. We feel comfortable with our spouse, and our spouse feels comfortable with us. And so we perceive that to be love because we feel comfortable enough with that person, place, or thing that we're temporarily willing to surrender that false identity. And we are feeling our authentic self. When we get to a point of divorce, that's because one or both of the parties, I mean, the females are doing this too, are reverting to that false identity more frequently, and they lose that resonance, that feeling of love that they had when they got married in the first place. The reason we choose a spouse is not biology. The reason we choose a spouse is they become our primary teacher, and we become their primary teacher by virtue of making us aware of the elements of this false identity that we've incorporated into this belief system.
Mm-hmm.
So when we lose a peer support, and our children are another peer support, when we lose a child, then we go into the condition of grief. And grief is nothing more than having lost a significant peer support for our false identity, who is who we think we are, and we experience fear over the instability of our false identity, and that's scary.
Mm-hmm.
But we also perceive the loss of the source of love that we were getting from that contributor to our peer support system. And in a divorce, it's very common in the people that I work with and the people that I know, they get a divorce and they immediately want to go out and replace that peer support, and they may get remarried in 3 months or 6 months with whoever they appears to be available, and it never ever in my experience is able to replace that peer support because they haven't changed. They haven't changed their identity, and they're looking for a replacement for that peer support. And it's exactly the same thing. If your house is built upon piers as opposed to a slab, and the pier under your bedroom gets washed away, every time you walk into your bedroom, the floor shakes and bounces. You're not going to feel comfortable going in and sleeping in that bedroom because the supports are not there. The same is true with heralding and keeping that identity the same way that it is. You've lost a peer support for that false identity. Now, what we're supposed to do is become aware that I need to change me. I need to change those beliefs that I've incorporated into my identity in order to get out of that grief condition. That is a condition that we've entered into unknowingly because of the fear of the instability of our identity and the fear of the loss of the love that we were perceived that we were getting from that individual. The reality is, every time we have felt love in our lifetimes, that is only because that person, place, or thing has allowed us to surrender temporarily our perception of self, our false identity, and we have felt who we really are. We're not getting anything from them other than permission. We're not giving anything other than permission. We are love. That is an inherent characteristic of who we are. And so understanding that and opening ourselves to change is the hard part, because we have to change the perception of who we are.
Yep.
Now, the tools to heal, we are obligated to interpret every single thought with an emotion. And emotion is, again, another misunderstood thing. We've got thousands of names for emotions. Those aren't emotions. Those are conditions of being that we enter into. Sadness, sorrow, grief, they're just different layers of conditions of being. The emotion is our decision with every single thought that either this thought feels good and I like it and I want more of it, or it doesn't feel good and I don't like it. That's an emotion. That's all there is to an emotion. So if you allow yourself to enter into the condition of grief, that is the lens that you're going to use to interpret every thought that you process. And so it is highly probable that you're not going to like any of those thoughts because of the condition of being that you are in. We collect every experience as a message to us, particularly the ones that we don't like. Those that we don't like, if we don't learn the lesson that was brought to us at the time that we had that experience, then we get to keep that lesson until we learn it. And we get to keep it in the form of emotional baggage. And over a lifetime, that accumulates to a significant load, and it is heavy. Someone who experiences depression is demonstrating the degree of the magnitude of the emotional baggage load that they're carrying, because we all have potentially the same amount of energy. And if someone told you before you're born your mission in life was to run down to the end of the street, and you're thinking, well, that's no problem. I can do that. They're giving me new running shoes and a new running outfit, and I'm just going to zip down to the end of the street and I'm going to have a great life. And then you start to run, and somebody walks up and hands you a 300-pound ball of concrete and says, you got to carry this ball of concrete. And you're thinking, well, damn, I can't run while I'm carrying this 300-pound ball of concrete. So your mission is the same. You still got to get down to the end of the street, but somehow you got to get rid of this 300-pound ball of concrete. And that's the emotional baggage. And it distorts our perspective, distorts our thinking, because our thinking requires some of this energy. And if we don't have enough energy, we can't think properly. Anybody that's done any engineering knows that if you've got a perfectly working machine, but you don't give it adequate energy to run, it'll run, but it'll just barely function. And so the first healing part is to invert your awareness, become aware of this emotional baggage, and begin to get rid of this ball of concrete a chunk at a time. And in so doing, you're learning the lessons that were brought to you in your life experiences that you didn't learn at the time. And so when you do that, your awareness escalates, and I'm explaining it like it's sequential, but it's actually parallel. you begin to become aware of these beliefs that you've incorporated into this false identity. And once you discover the problem, you're not going to just let it sit there. If you go out one morning to go to your car and you got a flat tire, you're not going to just, oh, well, I discovered the problem. I'll just let it sit there and never use the car again. You're going to fix the tire. Mm-hmm. Well, discovering the beliefs that you've incorporated into this false identity, you say, oh, yeah, that one, well, that's stupid. I'll get rid of that. And you just throw it out. And it's that easy to change those beliefs once you have enough energy and awareness in order to realize that that's the source of your stress. That's the source of your problem. And so the process of enlightenment is a process of learning the lessons that were brought to you with your life experiences that accumulated this emotional baggage, and then become aware of the beliefs that you're still incorporating into your false identity and begin to get rid of those. As you do, you experience greater happiness. You don't have to go out and get happiness. Happiness fills the void of the stress that's disappearing because you're doing the self healing. Now, the methodologies, I use three methods because they are so dramatically effective. And I've incorporated those into two of my books. One, and I'm putting a plug in here, but I've written it so it's so easy to use. You can self-apply these, and I use them all the time. I worked with a guy week before last that was a Vietnam vet. He had PTSD diagnosis since Vietnam. And I worked with him literally for 10 minutes. I only had about 10 minutes. Got rid of his PTSD, and he was a totally new person. It works that quickly. But the identity model is the name of the book, and it deals with stress. It explains the Hierophant. It explains all of this that we've been talking about, and how to heal, and how to get rid of this emotional baggage, lighten your load, and to get rid of it. And as I say, you can self-apply these, or you can work with someone else to do it. If you get it's great if you've got a buddy or somebody that you can process each other, and it goes dramatically quickly. I know it works. That's why I used on me. I used it myself as well as using it in my professional practice. If you want this information, everything that we've talked about, and a lot more, the book that we had referenced, the new book that's just on bookshelves, 1st of September, The Enigma of Consciousness, Spiritual Exploration of Humanity's Relationship to Creation. And it goes into much more detail than we can do verbally, and structure of creation, how creation began, how we formed this Hierophant. We also operate under an archetypical mind, which is a blueprint of how we process thoughts and how that changes as we progress along the path. I've tried to provide information for people that they can heal, not have to rely upon a therapist. I work with a lot of therapists. They refer me their patients. I get rid of their traumas and send them back to the therapist. And invariably, they tell me before they send the person that I can't get this person to talk. They just won't tell me, what's going on with them. We just sit and talk and BS for an hour. And I get rid of their traumas, and they tell me afterwards when I send them back, I can't get them to shut up because I got the emotional baggage off of it. You don't need the story. Most people can put the pieces of the puzzle of the story together themselves if they have the information, but they get rid of this emotional baggage, and it's, oh my God, there's the problem. Yeah, well, let me tell you about it.
I'm so in line with everything you just said. Like I said, I think you just say it. It sounds way more intelligent when you say it. Well, I'm just saying
that's part of my act.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you're doing a damn good job. I'll go ahead and tell you. Everybody listening has heard me say all of what you said, with the exception of the creator and the spiritual side of it that goes with the ascension through enlightenment. And all of this has been enlightening to me in the fact that it's more verification of the process and validation of the process that I've been going through and continue to go through. And I think in going through it, what we learn is that we will always go through it until we die. And that's how I know I'm dealing with somebody who has truly gone through a real recovery, or some real enlightenment is they say that they've sought me out as a result of wanting to continue to learn. I've learned a ton, but I'm continuing to learn. Oh, okay. Well, you've been here for a while.
Yeah.
We're in the same spot, and I'm appreciative you found me, and I'm probably going to pay attention to some things you say too, because you've obviously come through some growth on this. I can't, I think I'd be remiss to not ask you, with all of these things that you've pieced together, what happens when we die?
We, well, if you imagine that we're on a sports team, and like every sports team, you practice all week long, and then you've got a game on Friday night, say, and you see game films, you talk to coaches, you practice and try to do better than you did in the last game, and then you have another game. Right now, we're in the game, and when we die, we're simply going to integrate with our metaphysical self, and we'll do the same thing again. We'll review, well, I had intended to do that, but I didn't do that, or I did that, and go through the process of learning the curriculum of this range of consciousness. And then when you're ready, you'll incarnate again. The transitional process, the transition from where we are now back to our metaphysical self, when we die, and you can do this in meditation. You can't go all the way because you won't come back, but you can go significantly down the process. You will float above your body, and you will be confused because it's a change. You're no longer confined by the body. And so most people, they'll hang around for a few minutes and observe what's going on, with their body. If you're in an operating room or a hospital or wherever you are, you'll try to get your bearings a little bit, and then you will begin to progress following a series of lights, depending on where your consciousness is. If your consciousness is more advanced, you'll need fewer lights. If you are young in the process, then you will have more lights. The lights are essentially plateaus of transition from your perspective of being an incarnate body to reincarnating or remerging with your metaphysical self. And so whatever steps that you need are the steps they're provided, and they're identified by layers or by lights, which are actually just layers of reintegration with your metaphysical self. And invariably, all the stresses and traumas and all that stuff you had when you were incarnate will disappear because they're not important anymore. Just what you learned about the inherent characteristics is the only thing that is preserved and reintegrated with your consciousness pattern, with your metaphysical self. A ghost is nothing more than a person in transition that was so tied to something in their incarnate that they won't follow the process. They're afraid to follow the process. And where I'm living now, when I moved in, this used to be a plantation. And there was a huge tree that just the remnants of the tree were there when I moved in. But years ago, that used to be a hanging tree for slaves. And there were 6 souls that were still hanging around. And
I don't know if that was the best. Did you mean that literally?
Literally,
when you said hanging?
Literally, they were still. They perceived the property to be as it was, and so I was able to help 5 of the 6. I've not been able to complete the 6th one yet, but the 5 of the 6 completed their transition.
Wow, you spoke with them. You were able to speak with them.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, they can't interact with us. They're no longer physical, but yes, you can tune into them and guide them in their process.
Wow, so that's a good way to get rid of one if they're freaking you out, I guess, is
Yeah.
to try to help them on their way. Here, let me get your bags.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know if you said hanging around in the slang term that we mean when we say hanging around, because you're talking about people being hung. That's why
No. That was unfortunate.
Choice
co-use
of
words.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. No pun intended, right?
Right. Exactly.
They're hanging around. No pun intended. Well, that is a magnificent description that I have never heard. I'm appreciative that I now have heard it, because it makes so much more sense than the alternatives that I have heard. And it's much better than, we don't understand nothingness.
Right.
So it's something that really screws us up. I know I've got an aging mother. She's in her 80s, and morality, or mortality, not morality, mortality is such a huge weight on the human experience. So the incarnated experience, the huge weight of death is so big. And I can really be in line with the way that you just described things were going. And I'm hoping that's because it's exactly how it's going to go. So I'm going to be sharing your website. First of all, thank you so much. You've dropped an extreme amount of well put information on us, and I'm very appreciative of that. You've really connected some dots. I'm sure in listening to this, you'll hear me connecting dots within me, and so I'm discovering some things here. But at the end, I'm going to be sharing your website address, which is www.dd EAN Graves. So it's d.org. That's ORG. Can you tell us what we'll find when we go there? And as well, I'd like for you to share anything that we haven't covered that you'd like for us to know. You've talked about 2 books. I'd like to know where we can go buy those books. If you've got any projects going on now, or you've got some things that you're about to kick off that you'd like us to kind of be tracking about you, social media handles, both Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, any of these that you'd like us to know about, or if it's all centered there at the ddeangraves.org site, then that, inform us of that too. I just like to give you an opportunity to plug anything you want to plug, and I'm going to include any links that you want. I'll include those in the description section as well, so people can just click on them.
Well, my motivation for doing this podcast and everything that I've been doing since this transition period of my life is to provide people with information and motivation in order to do the work on themselves and transform themselves, and essentially to heal. I have 4 books. Enlightenment, Plain and Simple, is an introductory book. So if this is new to you, it just simply explains enlightenment and how you can begin to do some elementary tools to make some progress. The identity model is I wrote it for mental health professionals, but there's nothing technical about it. Everybody can understand it, and that talks about the Hierophant and why we perceive ourselves as we are, and why we experience the stress. And it also gives you the tools in order to self-apply and to begin the rapid healing process. Edifying Children of a Lesser God is beginning information, answering existential questions some of which we talked about here today. Mm-hmm. It also has the tools in the back of that. My most recent book is The Enigma of Consciousness, a spiritual exploration of humanity's relationship to creation. And that is much more detailed. It's available. The first 3 books are available on Amazon. The last book is available at an ebook, wherever you get your ebooks. Okay. Or it's available in your favorite bookstore. You just go in. If they don't have it, tell them to order it and stock it. And they'll keep you busy for a while. Okay. That one. I have a podcast, Chatting with the Arcturians, which is my significant other, and I communicate with the Arcturians, and they provide reiteration of this same information, but with a slightly different perspective. They are 6th, 7th density beings, so it's more significant stuff. Possibly have another podcast, Simple Enlightenment, which explains again all of this stuff in terms. The website that you just read is, you can contact me. It'll tell you more about what I do. It also has the references and the links to the books in there, and the podcast. So, and I have tons of videos of lectures that I've done on YouTube. Just search Dean Graves, and you'll find that. So, I'm available. All the information is out there. Not everything that I know, but almost everything. What color socks that I put on today is not on there.
That's in the next book. That's book 5. Right. Well, Dean, right. You're a fountain of knowledge. I feel better just of talking to you over this hour. about things and about the alignment and the enlightenment that I've gone through and the process that I'm in. I think you've given me some affirmation there. I'm very appreciative of you sharing your time with us. And for everybody listening, we are both appreciative of you sharing your time, your most valuable asset with us. And I know for a fact we brought value to you today. Until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.